Welcome to this video from the River Meadow technical team. In this video we're going to be looking at how we migrate MySQL on Linux to Azure. We're going to look at things like projects and entitlements and how they help us to get things organised. How we add a source and how simple that can be. How we migrate that source then into Azure. And then how, as part of the overall migration, we look at Delta migrations to get updates and keep things in sync. With any River Meadow migration project, the great place to start is with the SaaS portal. From here we can create and manage any projects that we need, and we can create all the entities that we need to. First thing I want to show you is cloud appliances. In this project we have two cloud appliances, one of which I've previously used for training and I've switched that off. The other of which is currently in use and is communicating with our portal, indicated by that green tick under appliance readiness. The next thing I want to do is show you projects. So we're going to look at projects and we're going to look at how we set one up. So here's our projects, and if we click on the project we can see the users. Now I've used this project for training, so there's some training users in here which I've obfuscated. Then we look at entitlements, and within there we can see that we've got entitlements assigned to the project, and they are for use just by this project and they don't have any effect on any other project. So what we need to do now is need to add a source. So we'll click on source inventory, which takes us to this list. You can see that we have plenty of sources already, but we need to add one specifically for this migration. All we need to add it is an IP address, which we'll paste in, a username and password. We enter the password twice in order to make sure it's correct. So I'll just enter that in, and I'll need to go back up there. I've forgotten to add a character, so we'll do that. And we'll add the password for confirmation, to confirm it, to make sure that we've got the password correct. I've also added some tags and I've put it into the database cluster migration group. So when I click on add, you'll see that it appears there at the top of the migration cluster migration group, ready to migrate. So what we'll do now is we'll click on the cloud icon to start the migration. That brings up the migration readiness check dialog box. We're going to select the cloud appliance that we've just selected, which is the one that's current, and then we'll click on check migration readiness. This will go off and check that that cloud appliance is actually up and running and that we can talk to it. It'll also kick off those pre-flight checks that make sure that nothing in the machine is going to cause us a problem and that everything we need to make the migration successful is in fact in place. So in a real project we do this ahead of time. Now the reason we do that is that any issues we have within the virtual machines or physical machines that we wish to migrate can be surfaced ahead of time and therefore remediated before they threaten our target migration date. Now this process does take a couple of minutes, so what we're going to do is we're going to fast forward to the point at which it's complete and we can get to those messages. We will see one warning. The warning is just telling us that CentOS 7.7 may not be supported, but we know it is, so we can continue with it and just ignore that for now. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a migration profile, and the migration profile tells the migration process everything it needs to know about the landing zone and where to land the machine. So the first thing in the migration profile that we'll see is that we can change the name. So I'm simply going to put the initials AZS in the front to make sure it's different to any other machine that we may have there already. Then what we're going to do is we're going to assign a resource group, and I'm just going to use the one that I've used for all of my previous migrations. So we're going to choose use existing, and there it is, our resource group is there. Now we got the option here to put it into an availability set if we want to, and we chose when we created the source to use a B2MS, so we're going to stick with that for now. And we can also change where the disks are going to live and what type of storage they're going to live on. We do need to set up or check the networking at least, and we've done that. We're going to use DHCP and a dynamic public address, and we are going to put it onto a dedicated network security group that I created earlier for databases, which makes sure that all the ports that I need are open from the places that I need them open to. The rest of this is stuff we don't need to worry about for now, so we can ignore that and we can say migrate. So you'll see we got that additional dialog box which I've clicked straight through. That was just telling us that we had a warning that we should have taken notice of, and we did, and it wasn't going to cause us a problem, so we can move straight through. So the next thing that happens is we're going to check that we haven't introduced any problems with the migration profile, and that happens very quickly, as you can see. Next, there's 3 steps in this migration. The first one is we create a target worker. Our target worker is what does the heavy lifting. The next step after that, once that is up and running, is that we then migrate the data and create the disks that we're going to use for this virtual machine. Once we've done that, we then take that temporary target worker and make it permanent using a step we call preparing target. And that makes it permanent. So you can see the 3 steps I've just outlined. This will take a little while, so we're going to fast forward to the end of this process so we can see that it was successful. And here we go, we're there. So 3 successful steps. We now have a target in the target environment ready to test. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go take a look at that source machine. And we're actually going to use a client called the MySQL Workbench. That allows me to log into the machine remotely and show you the database and the tables that are running on that machine. So we're going to log in. I've already set up a connection, which is this one here, ContextDB, and we're going to open it up. And there we are. We're connected to that machine. We can see a SQL statement right there, ready to run, and we're going to run a SQL statement on that table called contacts. And you can see it's got a few rows in it. We're ready to go. There's some data in there. So what I want to do next is we're going to log into the target machine that we've just created. So we're going to go back to the home page of the MySQL Workbench, and we're going to create a connection to the target machine. So to do this, we're going to need to create a connection. So here's the connection wizard. What we're going to need to do is get the IP address of that machine so that we can create a connection. So we're going to do that by hopping back into the platform and getting the details from the details of the migration that we did initially. So we'll just hit the plus sign, and down the bottom here in the target we'll find a public IP address for it. We'll copy and paste that into the MySQL Workbench wizard. So we'll go back into and add the target. We're going to call it Azure DB, just so that we know it's in Azure and it's a database. And then we'll paste the details in here. And we're going to use the same password and username that we used for the migration. So we'll just populate that now. So it's River Meadow. And then we'll put in the password when we do the test connection. So we're going to test the connection, put in the password, and make sure that we can actually connect to that. Now you'll remember that we used a network security group that will allow these connections through, so this should work first time. And there we go, it's saying it's connected and we're ready to go. So now we'll get a connection on the front page, the home page, and we can double click on that, go into the database. We can go and take a look at the database table. And you should see, and indeed you do, it's exactly the same as the database table on the source machine. So we can see that the data was copied across correctly. So what I want to show you now is how this really works in a real migration. So we're going to do a change to the database here. We're going to make some changes. We're actually just going to add a row. So we're going to add a single row and we're going to populate it with some spurious data. It's just a phone number and a zip code for the US, which those with eagle eyes will probably recognize. No prizes for guessing what it is. What we're going to do then is we're going to apply that to the database, make sure it's committed to the database. And that's done, so we now have a new row in the database. Now, when we do a Linux migration, we don't use VSS. We have to use something else. So we do file level migrations. What we'll need to do is to make sure that the database is copied across with a Delta migration successfully, is we're going to need to query the database. So what I'm doing now is I'm just logging into that machine. As you can see, I've logged in using SSH. Type in the password, and then we can run a script that will shut down the database and flush everything in memory down to disk, so that when we actually run the Delta migration, we're sure that everything's going to get moved across. We call this quiescing the server. So we'll run this database shutdown script. You can see it says the database is now shut down. And now what we can do is we can proceed with a Delta migration to migrate all of the changes across to the target machine. So to do a Delta migration, all we need to do is find that full migration and we click on the refresh icon, which is effectively going to do a Delta migration. Now we can do the Delta migrations right now. We can do them at some point in the future, and we can schedule multiples if that works for us. We can also schedule a time, and we can schedule them to be continuous, which means once one Delta migration is finished, we'll immediately run another one. This is where data rate of change is high. We can make sure that they're done frequently. We're just going to run this one now, so we'll say confirm and we'll start that Delta migration. So what's happening now is we're going to start a migration. We're going to do a quick pre-flight check to make sure that everything's okay, that we can actually do this differential or Delta migration. That won't take 2 ticks, so we'll see this progress bar move fairly quickly and we'll get on to actually doing the Delta migration. And to kick it off, we just need to say migrate. Now that will go away and it's going to look at all the files that have changed and move all the files that have changed across. That's why it's key for us to make sure that we've quiesced the database and that everything is in a flushed state. This won't take very long, so what we'll do is we'll quickly fast forwards to the end where it's completed. So there we can see the migration is completed and everything has been copied across. So what we need to do is we just need to go and make sure that we've tested that. And in a real migration, this is what we would do in reality, is do some smoke testing to make sure that everything that was supposed to move across has moved across and the machine is in a state ready to do a cutover. So to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to log into the target machine this time again, using the workbench that we used before with the same credentials as we used before, and we'll log into it and we'll go and check that that table is still there and that the rows that we added are there indeed. So we'll expand that into tables and into the table that we had, which is the contacts table, and then we can have a quick look and see and make sure that that row is added. You can see that row 7 is there with that famous postcode. So it did in fact work, and we copied across all of the information and the database is now in sync. At this point we would be ready to do the cutover and move this machine into the production networks, etc. So what we covered in this video was how we migrate MySQL on Linux to Azure. We looked at projects and entitlements and how those can be used to isolate the resources that we're using, how we can add a source and how simple that was, simply IP address and password, how we can then migrate that source across to Azure using our tool, and then how we use a Delta migration to make sure that any changes that have happened get copied across to this target machine in a timely and accurate manner. So thank you for watching the video. I hope you found it informative and useful. Please feel free to email us at sales@rivermeadow.com for more information, and do check back, there's plenty of exciting stuff going on at River Meadow.